Kate, you're muted.
I realized that I was on mute. I just wanted to say, Sabrina and I will be here in the background. We'll turn off our cameras and our mics, but if you need anything, just let us know.
Awesome. Appreciate it. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Heather Kong. I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon at the Shriners Hospital in Portland, Oregon. I'm a member of the RJOS Education Committee who's hosting this webinar. And this is the first of 2 webinars on this topic. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists today who you'll hear from. And then just wanted to give a quick plug that the next webinar, if I can get my slides to go forward, maybe not. There we go. Is going to be Wednesday, April 10th, so a couple months from now, with this other set of speakers who are all great. And everybody's got a lot of different perspectives and experiences that we're going to be excited to hear about. You'll get an announcement and invite for the second part of the webinar series toward the end of March. And with that, we'll start with our first speaker, who is Dr. Abidemi Adenikinju. Let me stop sharing my screen. So Dr. Adenikinju completed orthopedic residency at NYU and then hand surgery fellowship at Mayo in Rochester. She currently holds the position of associate medical director in the physician investigator program at Vertex Pharmaceuticals.
Hi, sorry, we did a practice run and now I'm struggling to share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right. Hi everyone. Oh, you guys can see my screen, right? Yes. Okay, good. Hi everyone. My name is Abidemi Adenikinju. I go by Abby, and I'm here to talk to you guys about my transition from ortho to the pharmaceutical industry. So, to give a little background, although it's already been said, I finished my residency in 2022, and then I just finished a fellowship in hand surgery this past July, and I started at Vertex, the pharmaceutical company I'm at now, in September. So why did I transition? I'm sure a lot of you guys are, wondering. So I'll just kind of go over it very briefly. Not going to go into too many details, but suffice it to say that I was facing a lot of challenges in both my personal and professional life and was just very unhappy. This was largely owing to a significant disconnect between the values and priorities that I had for myself, my passions, and the future that I kind of saw laid out if I stayed in clinical medicine. It didn't seem like this space or living in this space was sustainable. And so I began to explore what other options were out there. So most of this, I'm just going to chat about what my journey looked like, and recognizing that everyone's journey may be different. But essentially, it started out with just figuring out what are the options. And I had to be realistic as I thought about this, because to be fully transparent with you guys, I have a significant amount of student loan debt. So I kind of couldn't just do anything. I have two small children, and was supposed to be the primary breadwinner. So these are just things that I had to consider as I was looking into what other options there were for me if I did not, kind of stay the path in clinical medicine. So this led me to aggressively networking, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. And then I did get an executive coach, and I thought that was tremendously helpful as well. And then lastly, it's just like finding the actual opportunities. And this is just like looking for any other job, and lastly, making the decision. And this was a big piece for me because I think it's a big decision. It was a big decision, and it was almost kind of like a leap of faith, because as much as I talked to a bunch of people, which I definitely talked to way more people when considering this transition than I did when I decided to enter the medical field to begin with. It's still different talking to people versus experiencing it yourself. But yeah, I was empowered eventually to make that decision. I am happy now. So now I want to just talk a little bit more about the aggressive networking, because I think that is the main thing that helped me get to not just get where I am now, but also inform me about the different opportunities that were out there, because I didn't know that all of these other paths for MDs or just like even practicing physicians existed. And so how do you go about doing that? First, I utilize my personal network. So this is, reaching out to my friends, my family, different like colleagues that I felt comfortable like talking to about it, letting them know like, hey, like I'm kind of considering this thing. Do you know anyone with my similar professional background, like any MDs that are working in any other fields, just so I can learn more about what those paths are? And I did learn about some other things like consulting and like utilization management, for example, or working for insurance companies. That's what that is. I think someone's going to talk about that, so I won't talk about that. And then utilizing kind of pre-existing communities. So I hadn't used Facebook, I think, in probably 10 years, but I think now it's one of my main sources for like professional engagement. Somebody told me in like one of these conversations I had with somebody that about this Facebook group, Physician Non-Clinical Career Hunters, and that group was like kind of like a beacon of light in this time of just confusion. Like what can I even do if it's not like consulting, for example? And there I learned so much about the different paths that were available for physicians outside of the clinical world. There is like a strong emphasis, I'll say, like on the pharmaceutical industry, utilization management, and things like clinical documentation integrity, which are all like, different paths for physicians who want to do something different. But there's still other people who do other things. And I think I'm not a particularly extroverted person. So like, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to join these communities and like kind of go in guns a-blazing and, you know, post right away. But I spent a lot of time just reading the posts that were there. There's a wealth of information, and you can find people with kind of shared experiences who are looking for, or at one point were looking for what you were looking for now, and just kind of read about their journey. And then through these groups also, I was able to make these connections with people. And so I would reach out to like somebody who I thought might be interesting to talk to, particularly somebody maybe who was in the group who's an orthopedic surgeon and is now doing something else. And I would reach out to them both either on Facebook or LinkedIn and say like, hey, this is who I am. This is kind of what I'm looking to do. I've noticed, you know, XYZ thing about where you are, and I would love to hear more about your journey and how you made this transition. And I think most people said yes. Not everyone says yes, but those like phone calls were really pivotal in just letting me know not just about this option exists out there, but what does it look like? Like, what exactly are you doing? And you have the power in that conversation. So like, if you are like looking to do something like that, I encourage you to equip yourself with like a bunch of questions for this person, because they are giving you, you know, your time, and it's only as helpful as you make it. That's what I'll say. So large plug for like networking very aggressively. And then just to go into my executive coaching experience, I wanted to talk about this a little bit, just because before my experience, I didn't really know what they did. Like you hear about like life coaches or whatever, but I didn't know what an executive coach was. And I'll say that mine was not a physician coach. It was just actually they target, or their audience is more leaders in like the nonprofit world or in education. So like school leaders or CEOs of like those types of organizations. And I'll to also be transparent, preface it to say that I lucked into like getting it for free. It can be pretty expensive, so may not be something that everybody can do, but if you can, I recommend it. It's centered around kind of building your emotional intelligence. And for me, it helped me really realize my value, and empowered me to not just take anything that you know I was given. Because I think just my experience in life, you give me something and I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll make, you know, the most or the best of whatever this opportunity is. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. You have value in yourself, and something can be given to you and it's not good enough, or you deserve more. And there's nothing wrong with challenging that other side, essentially. And there are lots of people who already know that lesson or already have that lesson. I was not one of them. So that was one thing that I really gained. And then just to speak about my like values, it really helped me clarify what my values are, what my priorities are, and figure out how I can align those with whatever choice I make in a career. And that those were probably the two main things that I took away from my coaching experience. And once again, it's not, I think everyone's experience, maybe everyone offers something different, but mine was just like 10 sessions over the course of like, you know, several months. And yeah, tremendously valuable. Now I'm just going to talk about what does it look like to be a physician in pharma? Like, what exactly are you doing? And this is not all inclusive of like every single role for physicians, but just to give you kind of a general understanding or overview. So there are three main kind of areas that physicians can work in, or physicians typically work in within the pharmaceutical industry. There's clinical development, and those are the people who kind of, so they design and oversee clinical trials for whatever new drug or whatever is getting developed. And they're, you know, evaluating the safety and the efficacy of the drug. They work closely with the research teams to develop the protocols, they analyze the data, and then just ensure that, you know, the trials are complying with regulatory standards. And then there is pharmacovigilance or safety, and these are the people that monitor the safety of drugs, typically that are already on the market. However, there are like safety counterparts on ongoing trials as well. So they are monitoring the adverse events or the side effects, and assessing the potential risks of any drugs that are either already on the market or ongoing trials. And then lastly, there's medical affairs, and to be honest, medical affairs is still a bit of a black box to me, but my understanding is it's the link between pharmaceutical companies and healthcare professionals. And it can look a little different at different companies, but essentially they provide medical and scientific expertise in supporting the clinical trials and kind of take the data that comes out of it and figure out the messaging around it. Yeah. Other things or other roles I've come across or areas I've come across, some physicians in our research. So these are the people that are, at the bench, kind of figuring out or making the molecules and things like that. For example, at my company, the chief scientific officer, he is a physician. And then there's regulatory affairs. These are the people that kind of work to make sure that the products that we're coming out with comply with regulatory standards and requirements, and then help support with anytime you're submitting like a new drug application, NDA, that's what it's called. They are the ones that kind of help put all that together for the FDA, or the same like the FDA in other countries, just to make sure that everything is up to standards. And then also medical writing. These people write large amounts of like the scientific documents that we have. So for example, every clinical trial that's conducted has a CSR, a clinical study report, and medical writing, they write a large amount of that. And then like the different groups kind of fill in data here and there, but they kind of are responsible for the templates. And then just to go over what is the kind of general direction that a physician can go within pharma. This isn't by any means like all-inclusive and the way it is everywhere, but in general, just in my experience at the company I'm at now, which has been very brief, but in talking to people with, years of experience, typically you come in as like an associate medical director, then medical director, senior medical director is when you start having direct reports, and then you may become an executive and then ultimately a VP. Past that, it's like CMO and CEO, which, if you aspire to be that, wonderful. Not every company has that associate medical director level, and not every company has the executive. It just kind of can change, but this is the general trajectory. And I think what I've heard is that typically you spend anywhere from 2 to 4 years at one level, and then you kind of go higher and higher as your kind of work dictates. Yeah. And so what am I doing now exactly? So I'm in the physician investigator program at Vertex. This is a program that targets early career physicians who want to transition into industry. It's not the only one that's within like pharma. There are a couple other companies like Takeda, for example, has one. I think Bristol Myers Squibb used to have one if they don't have one anymore. But the point is it targets people who want to transition to industry. And the idea is that it's like a whole new world. So it's kind of helping to ease that transition and in some ways accelerate the transition. This specific program, I do 4 6-month rotations in departments and therapeutic areas that I choose after learning a little bit more about the company, talking to different groups and figuring out what I'm interested in and what I want to learn about. One thing I'll back up and just mention to make a little bit more sense is that within a pharmaceutical company, they may have like different therapeutic areas. So that's like what different disease areas are they working on essentially. And you get a lot of mentorship from senior leadership, and then there's like leadership development baked in. And at the end of the 2 years, you essentially pick where you want to land. So far, it's been a wonderful experience for me. It's an incredibly intellectually stimulating environment. And particularly at Vertex now, it's just a very exciting time to be here. We recently got the sickle cell disease treatment approved, which was incredibly exciting. And then hopefully this year we're going to get a new pain medication approved. And that's what I've been working on kind of closely since I've been there. My first rotation, I'm doing clinical and quantitative pharmacology, which has been interesting because I haven't thought about any of those things probably since biochem in college, but I have learned so much in like the 5 months that I've been here. And it's very exciting to kind of be part of something that hopefully will change the game in pain management. What does my day-to-day look like? I'm hybrid, so I'm in the office 3 days a week, and it's kind of a flexible schedule. Whoops. So the last thing I'll talk about is just some of the things that I feel like are downsides or things I'm missing out on before we move on to the next person. The main thing is board certification. And that's something that's been a struggle for me because like I felt like even if I wasn't going to practice clinically, it would have been, you know, kind of the icing on the cake of my, you know, the accomplishment of, you know, going through all of this like education and training. But I just don't think it's gonna be possible to do. I initially when I started, I thought that I would find like some part-time situation because my job does afford me that flexibility and encourages physicians to, you know, continue practicing clinically part-time if they want to. But I just haven't been able to find the opportunity. And it could be because I'm in Boston. It could be because the market is saturated or people aren't looking for someone who's only going to be there one day a week. I'm not sure, but that's something that I've kind of had to probably give up on because I don't know how, you know, to make it past, like make it through boards collections and things like that. So that's one thing that it's not great because while I love pharma, it's not particularly necessary in pharma to be board certified, but board certification does help you and is necessary for other paths like utilization management, which I think somebody else is going to talk about. Patient care, some of my like highest moments in my like brief tenure in medicine were those patient interactions, and I do miss them at times. And then external perceptions. And this is just like not being fully understood or being viewed differently by people whose opinion matters to you. And this can be anything from like, you know, your parents, like my parents, they didn't get it initially because they're like, you've been doing this for 10 years. Why are you stopping now? They're fine now. So it's all good, but like not just them, like mentors, for example, didn't really understand it. And I feel like some damage has been done to relationships that I can't really, you know, hopefully time will heal, but just there is that piece of it. And then lastly, it's starting over. The longer you're doing something, the harder it is to, you know, just drop it and do something else. And yes, I'm still using some of my clinical knowledge, but it's not the same as what I've been doing the past, you know, 6 years. And so I think it can seem like an insurmountable hurdle to just like completely kind of abandon what you spent so much time working on to something that you know nothing about. But I've chosen to kind of approach it with some excitement and just there's so much to learn, and I try and just learn as much as I can every day. So yeah, those are some of the downsides, and I think that's my time. Hopefully I haven't talked too long. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you so much. That was a great start. I do see a couple people who have put questions in the chat, and we're going to save all the questions until the end after all the speakers have gone. But feel free to keep the questions coming either through the chat, or if you raise your hand at the end, I think I have the ability to unmute you to ask your question too. But thank you, and we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Alexis Dixon. So Dr. Dixon completed her orthopedic surgery residency at the Los Angeles County General Medical Center, and then a foot and ankle surgery fellowship at Baylor. She is a qualified medical evaluator for the state of California and has testified in over 2,000 legal cases, primarily in the Division of Workers' Compensation. She's the founder and CEO of Orthopaedic Qualified Medical Evaluators, which is a medical legal management company, and she'll be speaking to us about that.
Sorry, we did practice this, and now I'm having some sort of error message on the computer that's not letting me share my screen with you. Oh no, there's an error. Nothing now.
just get off this entirely and be on the computer.
Dr. Kong, should we perhaps move on to the next speaker and we'll have Dr. Dixon?
Sure, we can switch the order around. So next we'll have Dr. Karen Flood. Dr. Flood is from the United States military, did her orthopedic training at Madigan Army Medical Center, including subspecialty specialization in sports medicine. She has served in various leadership roles in orthopedic surgery at Fort Hood, Fort Stewart, and Fort Benning, including deployments to Iraq and Kuwait. After completing her military service, she has done contract work for workman's comp and disability insurance reviews, Veterans Administration examinations, military recruit examinations, utilization management, and has been a subject matter expert for television shows.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I've got myself off mute. Yeah, very good. So yeah, Dr. Karen Flood, glad to be here this evening. I learned a lot already from Abby, so I am thrilled to be part of this panel. So the question I like to talk about is, how did I go from the young lady in the picture, this is in the mid-90s in Bosnia, to where I am now, sitting in my office, working almost full-time from home remotely? And the answer to that question, how did I get there from here, is I honestly got burnt out. My last assignment was the chief of surgery at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, Georgia. I took call over holiday weekend on the third night in a row of being in the OR at 2 or 3 in the morning on trauma call. While my husband was home making Thanksgiving dinner, I thought, why am I still doing this? Are there other choices? Is there something else I can do? Surely it's somebody else's turn to do this for a while. Work-life balance is a challenge. There's 2 young ladies in the picture there. It's hard to be a full-time surgeon mom and take care of kids and all of the other things. It can be done. I was a single parent for most of my military career. It can be done, but it's not easy. And I was getting really tired of it. Additionally, I'd recently gotten remarried. I was heading to a large metro area where the jobs were more challenging to get, at least jobs that didn't require a 45-minute to an hour commute. So I said, what are my other choices? So I opened up my Academy journal, and this little tiny ad in the back that offered me my first job, which was working in workers' compensation. Since then, I've done a variety of different things. I'm going to mention each of them briefly, and then if people later want to hear a bit more about specific ones, I'd be happy to do so. So these are the things that I've done over the past now almost a decade. Initially, some locum tenens work, which I've done since I finished board certification. Prior to that, continued initially. Workers' compensation, some disability insurance work, utilization management, veterans exams, and as Dr. Khan said, I was briefly on television, which was really fun. What did this give me? Well, it gave me a little bit better work-life balance. I got to be a room mom for the kid in the picture there. It, more importantly for me, let me set my own calendar. If I want to be on vacation, I go on vacation. If I want to work, then I work. And I didn't have to carry a pager anymore, which was obviously quite nice. What do you lose? Previous presenter talked about this, and this is hard. I think whether you just have only briefly in practice or had spent a little bit longer time like I had, it's still really hard. I work primarily from home. It is most of what I do is remote work in the office that you see me sitting in. You don't get the patient continuity, the patient contact that you do working in a clinical setting. It's also a big change in identity. I was a senior medical officer and orthopedic surgeon for quite some time, and trying to explain to others is, that the folks have mentioned, is it's hard to explain exactly what am I doing, who am I now, and what does that mean for my identity. And the last part of it is, if I'm not working, I'm not getting paid, which is kind of a bit of a problem as well if you can't find regular, steady work. And honestly, I just miss surgery. I enjoyed being a surgeon. I enjoyed operating. And it was a little hard to step completely away from the table and say that's no longer part of what I do. So what jobs have I done? So the first job, as I mentioned, was in workers' compensation. This is from an ad I answered in the back of the Academy Journal, just in a regular yellow journal, sent my CV off. I've actually faxed it off. Say, well, we'll see what happens. And it turns out I found a really interesting job, and I did it for about 4 years. I reviewed medical file for a workers' compensation insurance company in a completely remote position, working whenever I had the time and ability to work. and would basically review the file and be an advisor, a physician advisor to them to talk about what anticipated recovery might be for this individual. Did they appear to be recovering on schedule? Would an IME be useful? Things of that nature, stuff that you probably already have most of that knowledge, although I did have some mentors along the way. The biggest way, though, I learned a great deal about it, though, is in the academy runs a workers' compensation and musculoskeletal injuries course. I attended that the first year. I believe it's a yearly setup. I learned a lot from that. So for anyone that's considering entering the workers' compensation world, disability world, doing IMEs, very great course, really learned a lot. There's also a lot of networking there, and it's really useful. So hopefully they continue to put that on yearly. It's a great course. The next job that I took was one working in disability insurance reviews. This is honestly probably the most straightforward one I have that uses the most skills that I'd previously developed, because it really requires you to do what you do on a regular basis in clinic, talking to patients. You talk to them about reasonable restrictions and limitations based on their musculoskeletal condition, when you think they might get back to work. And in this case, you're just putting into report. So what happens is I get sent a medical record. It might be 10, 20 pages, and might be 1,000 pages. I go through that, and then I generate a report that gets sent to the insurance company that it defines some of these things for them. Occasionally, I reached out to the physician that's taking care of the patients. Other times, it's completely based on what's in the record. This job was one that I found through LinkedIn posting. I get roughly a weekly email that gives options for different jobs, and this is one that was in there, and I'm very happy that I have it. It's been a very rewarding job. The next one that I do also for the past approximately 5 years is doing VA disability exams. Some of this is remote, very similar to what I do for disability insurance, but it's also in person. So roughly once a week, the contract company that I work for flies me to a different city, and typically back in the same day, depending how far away it is, to do a veterans exam from an orthopedic surgeon's standpoint. I got this job from a completely unsolicited cold email based on my CV that was on LinkedIn. Somebody saw my background in military medicine, some back-end practice in disability, and offered me the opportunity to interview for the job. The biggest qualification for this is I live in the city of Atlanta. It makes it very easy for me to travel to another city to do examinations. And I have some experience in veterans claims and military disability. And my most recent job is one in utilization management. I've worked for a couple different companies. One of these was an actual employed position, although the one I'm currently in is a contract position. These are also found through online job postings. And I think most of us know what utilization management includes. The biggest thing I would say is that different companies function very differently as far as how they utilize their physicians. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide of how that impacts your life. And the last job that Heather mentioned is I did work very briefly on television. This is a picture of me with more makeup and more time spent sitting getting my hair done than I spent on my wedding day. I got this through just a social media connection. Our local physicians group, there's a woman there that works full time in television. That's what she does. She's a medical expert. And they have wisely in the TV and film industry figured out that it is much simpler to teach a medical professional how to be on camera than it is how to teach an actor to learn medical terminology. Consequently, if you're in an area like LA or Atlanta or another area that has a very busy television and film industry, there are opportunities to get paid to be on camera as a medical expert. It was a lot of fun. It's not something I'd ever done before, no, but it's definitely a cool thing to get to do, and kind of shows you the wide range of things that are out there. I mean, we are the city of Sanjay Gupta, so there are folks that do this full time, although I'm not one of them. Things that people ask me a lot when I tell them what I do. They talk about with previous comments about clinical competence and skills. Most of the jobs I've listed do require relatively recent clinical practice, a valid medical license, and board certification as an orthopedic surgeon. And I would say that going back to clinical practice, if you've had a gap, is very challenging. I did locums work throughout my time in the military and also for the first few years after that. But if you aren't doing enough surgical cases, it gets harder to find a locums position. And so I would, if you're on this path and considering moving into non-clinical practice, I would think carefully about that and try to figure out a way to at least stay briefly within active clinical practice while you're sorting that out. Board certification is also important. The Academy does have alternate pathways. There is a non-operative practice pathway and a non-clinical practice pathway. I'd previously gone through 2 rounds of board certification and was entering my 3rd by the time I'd moved into the non-clinical realm. And I'm currently recertifying as a non-clinical practice. So it is an option to maintain your board certification if you transition into a non-clinical role. I do have a lot of medical licenses. Being in the military, I lived a lot of places. That's a bonus if you're looking for a lot of these non-clinical roles, because there are rules and regulations in different states as far as what you need. The ones in Texas and Georgia in particular are ones that are a little bit are fairly important, because those states have a little bit more restrictive rules. And also say it's a challenge to keep your CME and your active learning going in this process. For me, when I was in active clinical practice, my office had regular CME. We had regular interactions to maintain that. When you're on your own, it's a little bit more challenging. I've had to consciously do that. I would echo the comments about using LinkedIn, other online job postings. The more you interact with those, the more you keep a current CV up, the more connections that you make, and the easier it is to find different jobs that might fit your profile and what you're looking for. Attending conferences helped. I mentioned the AOS conference that I'd attended early in this process. A lot of local meetups and medical societies, as well as word of mouth. The online non-clinical group has a lot of different medical specialties on it. And they will often post saying, hey, my group is looking for somebody in this specialty. Do you know anybody? So the more of those connections you can make, the more of those you can keep open, the more options that you'll have and the more things that are out there. And the last thing I would say is I've learned a lot about work conditions over this process and working for different companies now that I've worked for roughly 6 different ones in different capacities. Some people like having very defined hours. Some people like self-determining them. As for me, I much prefer to be in Alaska working, which like I am here in this picture, hanging out with my family. There are some constraints working out of the country, but different people like different things. Some companies give you your own equipment. Some you have to use theirs. I have 2 very large screens on my desk right now that are from the company I'm currently working for. That's not my favorite, but that's what I need to do to work with them. Company cultures are very different. Some the companies I've worked with expect me to interact with my coworkers on a daily, regular basis. Other ones, I may not speak to a coworker for a month. There's a pretty wide range. And again, different people like different things. Hourly reimbursement versus project-based. Most of the time you're paid by the hour. There are some that pay you by the project or by the report. Benefits, there are a handful of companies that do offer full-time or nearly full-time positions that come with benefits. I'm fortunate with being retired military, I don't need that. It is an option, but it is a little bit harder to find. And also, instead of malpractice insurance, these jobs typically cover you under an errors and omissions insurance. So that is still a thing. And then subject to your questions at the end, that concludes my talk.
Awesome, thank you. Learning so much from each of you. Dr. Dixon, you want to try again?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for being patient with me, you all. We're in LA here, and so it's almost the full moon. And so that other computer will be promptly charged with our crystals under the next full moon. I wanted to address something that Abby said, which was before I get into my talk, which was about closing the door on clinical practice or something along those lines, feeling like you're stepping away from clinical practice. I just want to reassure you, you're not. I have a lot of friends who have done similar things. You are simply going on to the next phase of your life. And in my opinion, education only opens doors, it doesn't close them. And so I really commend you for taking the brave step into something completely different, and it's a step up, and that's really fantastic. And I think it actually is better that Karen went before me, because she gave me a little introduction as far as medical legal practice in orthopedics, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And it's going to be a little bit different of a talk, because I'm not going to tell you exactly why I got into legal practice, because it's very obvious, isn't it? I'm in LA. Practice is very expensive, and someone told me that you can make money doing this. I didn't get into it because of a passion for legal work or anything along those lines, but it was because I did not want to be working 7 days a week anymore. So I run and own Ortho Legal, a medical legal management company here in California that is mostly focused on contested workers' compensation cases. Why are we doing medical legal work? Well, The reason most people do it is exactly as I said. Our expectations for what clinical practice would look like do not match up with reality, and that reality changes every day, and it gets bleaker and bleaker for the most part. So it's good to have a buffer against the fluctuations of clinical practice. Many of these are really obvious in our everyday life. We are seeing declining reimbursements in clinical practice throughout the country. You can see here our sports colleagues had a decline in reimbursement of 30%. Adjusted for inflation. You can see starting from when most of us were pre-meds, thinking about going into medicine, it's a really different world. My specialty, foot and ankle surgery, and I am still in clinical practice, also had the same decrease. At the same time, we're seeing increasing costs of running the clinical practice. Everyone's suffering from the same inflationary realities that we are, but as physicians, we have additional pressures. For those of us in solo private practice, our rents are increasing. And at the same time, staff is getting more and more expensive. Here in California, we pay $25 an hour for all healthcare workers. Something that's really important that I want to focus on here is that medical legal work is orthopedic work. This is very much a part of an orthopedic practice. Here in California, which is the largest subnational economy in the world, 60% of our contested workers' compensation claims go to an orthopedic surgeon for their expertise. So settling these disputes requires orthopedic expertise. This is very much an expectation of something that we can provide to the system. Here is the breakdown of contested workers' compensation cases in California for this data is from 2022, and I analyzed this myself. That big chunk of the pie right there, guess what? Orthopedic surgery. Next two pieces of the pie are also musculoskeletal. And in my opinion, we should be able to claim those back at some point if we have high quality people doing the reviews. And again, this is contested workers' compensation cases. All of the other specialties, they would love to have the opportunity that we do. And they work hard and try to get these cases like we do, but they simply don't have the volume of work-related injuries that we do. So here's something that's really special about medical legal work. There is absolutely no turf battle here. There will never be a PA who can take these cases from you. There will never be a nurse practitioner who can take these cases from you. You're not going to find a sports medicine doc who is able to give testimony to the level that is expected in a legal trial. People want orthopedic surgeons. They value your expertise. And by people, I mean the attorneys and the injured workers or the claimants in a legal claim. They know in their hearts that we are the end all for musculoskeletal injuries. And there remains the respect there. They know that what we say is what really is going to hold up in court. One of the really wonderful things about doing this work as a side gig, as opposed to just taking endless amounts of call, is that there's no medical liability here. And what I will tell you is that even after a long day of seeing legal cases or a nasty deposition or something like this, I come home and I sleep very well at night. Compare that to a surgery day where I often don't sleep before or after because I'm running through everything in my head. The legal work, it does not tax you mentally the way that clinical work does. And so having it in addition to your clinical work can provide significant income without the mental tax and the stress that we come to expect in every job that we do. So again, why should we be doing this medical legal work? And this is not how I treat my patients in clinic, but sometimes I think this, but I do love to see my patients for long-term follow-up. And I have a very boutique private practice, and I do have people that come just for social hour. So the types of cases that you will see in medical legal work within orthopedics, I'm going to talk about the one that I'm the most familiar with to start with. Every state has their own variety of workers' compensation. And basically, this is how it works in California and in many other states. You have an injured worker, and they can claim this injury, and the employer in their response will either accept it exactly as the injured worker and the physician say, or there will be a dispute over that claim. So let's start with the simplest case. The injured worker is injured, the employer accepts responsibility, they offer the appropriate treatment, and there's no contested case here. That injured worker can either go on to a full recovery, in which case they're not entitled to any financial settlement, they only get treatment, or there's some sort of permanent disability, in which case they are entitled to a financial settlement. Sometimes the treating physicians are not comfortable spending the time going through all the records to determine exactly all of the legal qualities of this case in order to determine the financial settlement. That's one way that you can become involved as someone who does this kind of work on the legal side for the state. Now, say that there is a dispute over the claim. In that case, the state earlier involves a neutral third party. In California, it's called a QME. In some states, it's called an IME. There's different titles for this, and the exact nature of the work varies from state to state, but most states have a way to present this to a neutral third party. That neutral third party, the QME in California, can then recommend treatment. And our word generally is taken above the level of treating physicians, or it can at least be chosen in preference to it, depending on the argument. And even then, the injured worker may make a full recovery, or they may have permanent disability. Now you're already involved. It will be you who ends up determining the legal factors of disability, including future medical care, if there's any apportionment to any prior injuries, causation, did it actually happen on the job, and the exact amount of impairment. So the benefits of why I like litigated or contested workers' compensation cases is because, especially in California, we have such a huge system here that they had to make them more efficient. So these stay out of court. You're never in a courtroom for this. You're able to do them in high volume. I personally see no more than 12 in a day, but I do about a day a week of this. And I typically see 8 to 12 of them each week, plus supplemental reports that come through and the occasional deposition. They're decent pay. These aren't going to be the huge cases that make you rich, but they're also not going to keep you up at night, like I said. And your pay is not dependent on the outcome. Your pay is dependent on a state law with a fee schedule that's written into the law, and there are consequences if the parties choose not to pay you. So you have recourse for this. This isn't something where you testify and then 4 years later, maybe you get a check or you have to take out a lien or something like this. This is very steady, reliable income. And one of the most important things that I didn't realize when I started doing this work is that it is essentially recession proof. The reason for that, and I'll use the pandemic as an illustration. In March of 2020, many businesses closed permanently or otherwise, and many employees were laid off or told not to come back to work. All of a sudden, there's a huge number of people who are out of work, and all of a sudden, their friends are telling them, hey, if you talk to my attorney, you can get some money. I told them that my back hurt, and now I have this money. And so there was a lot of frivolous claims, post-termination claims, legitimate claims where they just simply hadn't reported injuries before, but now they were angry. So there were a lot of cases that were being contested by the employers. At the same time, as time went on, more and more cases started accruing as people were working from home and had non-ergonomic workstations. And then as we went back to the office and back into the factories, the job market grew again, and you're getting more and more injuries. So this was completely recession proof. I remained very busy throughout the entirety of the pandemic and beyond. So that's my pitch for workers' compensation cases. Now, personal injury cases are other ones that are really common for people to get into early on in their orthopedic legal career. Again, laws vary by state, but Forbes magazine did do a study on this. And so it's important to know that these generally settle out of court. So you're probably not going to have to go to trial on this. Only 4 to 5% of them go to the trial. The reason for this is because they do terribly at trial. Only 50% success rate for the plaintiff or the injured person if it goes to trial. Now, if it's a subset of motor vehicle collision, there is slightly higher success, 61%, but it's still terrible odds. So they're always trying to settle. And so you can help them to get a fair settlement. So in this in these kinds of cases, you have the plaintiff or the injured person versus the defense, which is someone who caused the injury. If it was a slip and fall at Starbucks, that would be Starbucks. It would be the defense. You can testify for either of those sides. Each side picks an expert witness who then put their opinion on whether or not it was caused by what the plaintiff alleges and the factors of disability and whether or not they need future care and things like this. Now, medical malpractice. This is one where I tell people if you have to ask, it's not for you. This is not someplace you want to go as a beginner in the legal world. Plaintiffs are only successful in 19% of medical malpractice trials, so even less success. This is according to the Forbes study, so that's nationally. Again, you have an injured person versus the defense, which is now a physician. So you can imagine why this is one where I tell you, don't start here. These are very politically loaded kinds of cases, and you may find yourself having to testify for or against a colleague. And so this is something that's really for very experienced people only. I personally have never actually testified in a medical malpractice trial. I have been asked and I've turned them all down myself, even though I know the money is good. I just don't want to do that. So those are some of the major types of cases that you'll get. Now, what are the types of testimony you may be asked to provide? There's a report, there's a deposition, and then there's trial. So a report is very simple. This is what you're hoping for. This is what the bulk of our work is. You basically have templates. Depending on the state, you have AMA guidelines that you're able to base things off of. The formatting is very standard. The attorneys may write a letter, but it's very known and understood exactly what you need, what questions you need to answer in this case. And so we love reports. That's our bread and butter. Depositions, every now and again, things go to deposition. I've done over 2,000 cases and less than 1% of them end up having a deposition. That's for the workers' comp work. If you're doing more like personal injury, it's a lot more likely you're going to have a deposition. These days, they usually occur on Zoom, and despite that, I'm still terrible at Zoom. But you will find that these in-person depositions are not happening as much anymore because the attorneys are very happy to sit at home and not have to drive around town anymore. You're allowed to be fairly casual for these. Scrubs and a white coat is absolutely acceptable for most of these kinds of cases. Sometimes if you feel like you may be on unsteady footing, you may feel that wearing a suit can help your case a bit. But in general, if it's just for expert witness testimony, I think scrubs are generally fine. Recall, if you're ever deposed, that you are the expert. Everyone else in the room talks a lot of medical vocabulary, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. When you actually start listening to it, they don't really know what they're talking about. So don't lose confidence and don't be intimidated by what the attorneys are trying to tell you. Don't let them speak for you, and step back and just go back to what you actually know. Typically, what you're doing when you're providing testimony is just explaining medical concepts or orthopedic concepts that are very familiar to us, and you're having to explain them in the same way that you would speak to a patient. I'll give you an example. I had a patient of mine who tripped over a curb in a Starbucks parking lot. In this one, it wasn't for a deposition, it was for an actual trial, but I had to explain exactly what a Lisfranc fracture dislocation was, what the expected outcomes are, the general treatment for it. She needed surgery, she needed later hardware removal, all of this kind of stuff, and what she could expect and the risk of arthritis in the future, et cetera. It's very much the same things that we talk about with patients. Now you're just saying it to a different audience. And at trial, it's going to be a completely different thing. You definitely want to wear a suit here. There may or may not be a jury. If there is a jury, you're going to be talking to them directly. Keep in mind that a jury is trying to do a good job. They're trying to listen. They're trying to follow what you're saying. And they're really there to make the best decision that they can. And so really all you're doing is, again, explaining medical concepts to lay people. Sometimes you do have an overhead projector or something like that, which is a really cool flashback to the past. And I was able, on the Lisfranc case, I was able to show illustrations, and that was kind of fun. Again, you're the expert here. No one else in the room is. If you ever have to give testimony, I just want a little cheat sheet here. You want to enunciate very well, always say yes, always say no. You can't nod or shake or gesticulate. It's the words that come out of your mouth that are very important. You always slow down, you pause, you breathe, never talk over anyone. And if you ever feel threatened or pressured by the attorneys, this is something that I'm so glad someone told me. You verbalize this. You say, I don't know how to answer your question because I feel that you're trying to lead me to say something that I don't want to say. So I don't know how to answer that. Or, sir, you are raising your voice at me and I don't appreciate it. Can we go back to the question because I don't understand it? And the reason that's important is because then it shows up in the record. Because if it's a deposition, a judge is not going to be able to see those kinds of things. And so you want to make sure it shows up in the transcript if you're feeling that way. And that usually does get an overheated attorney to kind of calm down. Remember that it's okay to say that you don't know. And here's something I wish someone had told me early on. You're going to hear objections. And just so that you know, if you've never been in a deposition before, you do still have to answer the question, even if someone objects. You go ahead and answer it, and it may or may not be stricken from the record later. If you're being deposed and you have previously written a report on that case, refer directly to your report. Be sure you're not contradicting yourself. I always have 2 laptops open, one for me to refer to my report and actually search on the PDF for what I previously said, and I'll quote myself if it's something that I know I directly answered in the report. So I just really want you all to understand what a legal practice is for an orthopedic surgeon. I want you to understand that this is orthopedic work. It's very much a part of being an orthopedic surgeon. My prediction is that in the next generation, everyone's going to be doing this. It's going to be as common as taking call because of all of the reasons that I mentioned before. We are all highly intelligent people. This should not be intimidating. I want to make sure that you guys understand that this is very valid work. It's very much orthopedic work. It's well within our wheelhouse. As was mentioned before, I spent a lot of time at the LA County Hospital, 9 years there. And then I did my foot and ankle fellowship in Dallas, Texas. And I came back and joined, it wasn't really a group. It was kind of an affiliation of people in solo private practice. But I have since seen I would say between the practice and the surgery center, 6 or 7 turnovers in leadership and ownership. And so I had to learn early on how to be very independent. And so that led me into physician entrepreneurship. I don't tend to think of myself that way because it's such a loaded term. I just think of, I'm a physician in private practice, and then I also have a company that does the work that I was doing anyway. I found that I went into that field out of necessity, but the main driver wasn't necessarily, as I mentioned before, my passion for legal work, but it was really a passion for supporting other orthopedic surgeons and supporting our community. I see us as orthopedic surgeons as potential very savvy business owners. I don't believe the business people when they tell us that we don't know how to run a business. We all know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We all have gone through residency and had to lead people. And so we are all very well set up to be savvy business owners. And I don't like it when private equity groups and investors tell us that they're going to take the reins because we're not capable. I personally found the employed model to be totally intolerable. And with the way that I've been doing things, I've made a lot of time for my hobbies myself. I have definitely had a lot more time to myself than I ever did during residency to build on personal things that are of interest to me. And my goal and my dream is that other orthopedic surgeons are able to do that as well by paving their own paths. So I thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be speaking to you all.
Thank you so much. All right, our final speaker tonight will be Dr. Erika Mitchell. So Dr. Mitchell did her residency training at Case Western Reserve University and then an orthopedic trauma fellowship at Vanderbilt. She spent several years in clinical practice as well as doing bench research, and then eventually seeking a better work-life balance, made the transition to non-clinical medicine in a government role. She serves as a medical consultant for the Department of Healthcare Services in California, also known as Medi-Cal or California Medicaid.
Hello, everyone. Thanks. You're going to hear a lot of themes repeating in my talk, as you've already heard. So I am what is called a medical consultant to specialist. It sounds really special, but it really isn't. I work for Medicaid. I work for fee-for-service Medicaid specifically, and Medicaid in California is called Medi-Cal. So please don't hate me. I was a trauma surgeon. I know very much about Medicaid and its issues, and I know them very well. And it's not letting me go. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about my current job, though I will obviously describe it, because what I do now, honestly, it's not that exciting. And I didn't leave surgery for bigger and better things. And so what I'm going to focus on more is how I got here and why, despite having a very, stereotypical government job, really actually works really well for me, despite some of the issues. What is my job as an MCT specialist, besides the fact that I like saying I'm an MCT specialist because it sounds cool? It's a generic government term for a higher level position in utilization review, policy, litigation. It really depends on what division you work for as to what your actual role will be given any kind of position. I personally review a lot of appeals and disputes. I actually review almost all of the appeals and disputes for the state of California in fee-for-service Medi-Cal of services that have been denied. You'll be happy to hear that I overturn about 40% of them. Maybe that's not a good thing, that we deny so many. I also provide the medical opinions for litigation that comes against the Department of Healthcare Services in the state of California. In no way, shape, or form, though, am I ever feeling pressured or obligated to support or be on DHCS's side. I get medical records and I have to go back to the medical law. I mean, Medicaid and Medicare are all served by federal and state regulations. And I have to abide by those regulations and look at the medical records that I'm given and form an opinion only based on that. It may not agree with what DHCS wants me to agree with. It doesn't matter. And they've never bothered me about that. I provide research and opinions on Medi-Cal policy and state and federal regulations. Abby, we're going to have to talk about this because I'm currently working on the coverage of gene therapies, in case Casgevy is one of them that, as you mentioned, just got FDA approval. But it costs about $3 million per treatment. And for Medicaid, this is a big issue that we're trying to figure out right now. And so part of my job right now is trying to give my medical opinions on, in terms of trench doctoring, how we're going to be able to afford these very necessary and medically necessary treatments that by law we're required to cover. And so you can see I'm not just doing orthopedics. That said, in my department, I'm the only orthopedic surgeon. I'm only one of 2 surgeons. Everybody else generally is family medicine, pediatrics, OB-GYN, et cetera. There aren't a whole lot of surgeons that are willing to take the pay cut to work for the government. That being said, I think there are probably more surgeons who are now willing to just do anything to get out of medicine these days. At least that's some of the opinions I've been hearing. But in some ways that makes it fun for me, right? I've had to relearn a ton of medicine. I have to stay on top of a lot of medicine, and up to date has really become my friend. But I really want to focus on how I got here because I think that's why a lot of people are coming to this webinar, is they're starting to contemplate what are other options. I was a very gung-ho college student, and I think like virtually all of you who are orthopedic surgeons, right? I went to Brown University as an undergrad, Case Western Reserve. I did the research year on top of residency because I wanted very much to be an academic surgeon. I wanted to be very active in bench research. I got my fellowship at Vanderbilt, where I studied orthopedic trauma under Philip Krieger, and also started a lot of research there. Ended up staying there for my first job as an assistant professor. Things were, going the way they were supposed to be going, or as I thought they should be going for my career. I was on a pretty good trajectory, hitting all the check marks that I had put on my little goals checklist. I had a $1.3 billion federal grant to do bench research, looking at a genome-wide study of trauma patients and how that affected the formation of heterotopic bone. I was publishing, I was presenting. I was writing chapters. I was teaching at AO AO courses pretty much every other month. It seemed like it was going the way it was supposed to be going. But about 3 years in, I was completely burnt out. I was just fried. But I didn't know what else to do, and I just thought it would always just keep getting better. And so I just put my head down. In 2010, there was a huge political upheaval at Vanderbilt. A lot of surgeons left, not just in orthopedics, and I was one of the last ones, just because I didn't really know what else to do and where else to go. Thankfully, I had a lot of network connections through the AO, and I was able to land a job at Loyola University. And at Loyola, I was literally half as busy clinically, and I thought this was going to be a really good change for me. Unfortunately, at the same time, I also started running a lab with rat research going on, and I only had one research assistant. This was a ton of work on top of my clinical volume. And I didn't really understand how to negotiate for myself to get more lab time and less clinical time, because it's the clinical time that pays your salary, right? And the administration really wants you to just pull RVUs. Ultimately, it just wasn't a very good fit, and I was still really burnt out, really miserable. And I decided that I needed to start looking at what else was out there, but I had no idea what to do. And I was also starting to really hit, all the marks on my career. And it was very hard for me to make this paradigm shift to do something different. I incidentally just happened to be at the Academy meeting presenting in 2013, and I got approached by somebody who mentioned they were recruiting for this surgicalist position at Sutter Medical Center in Sacramento. I had no idea what that was, but I kind of dismissed it. But he gave me his card, and 2 weeks later, I was back at Loyola, burnt out after another really bad call night, and found myself making the phone call. Needless to say, I ended up coming out interviewing for that position and taking the surgicalist position. And so this was my first leap from the trajectory that I was meant to be on in my head, and came out to California, where I knew absolutely nobody, and took a non-academic job, which I just never saw myself doing. Some of you may be surgicalists. It's 24-hour shift work. I work 3 shifts a week, so in many ways this was fantastic. I had all of this free time. I was now in sunny California that had wonderful things to do. It actually paid more than my salary job, despite only working 3 days a week. I had a tremendous improvement in my work-life balance. But what that really did was tell me that there were all these other things in life that I had been missing out on, and I was now 40 years old. And it was a really big wake-up moment for me, to realize that everything I had dreamed about and wanted in a career maybe wasn't the right thing. I also just wasn't really satisfied with the job. It was so different from level 1 trauma that I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I didn't like this idea of passing off my patients all the time. I didn't necessarily trust all of my partners who were not trauma trained. I was sort of the fracture care doc there. I didn't like passing off patients who might have been treated differently by the other docs, or maybe they had different treatment protocols than I did. It made it very hard for me, and I didn't really like it. So I found myself working far, far less, and still unhappy and stressed, but just in a different way. I kind of couldn't win. But what else could I possibly do? And so I got to a point where, if you look at this image, this window was at Sutter Medical Center, and I had to walk by it every day that I was there, and it sort of epitomized what I felt on a given, any given day. I was sort of flying high and just hit a wall. I didn't know what else to do, and I started just doing searches for anything shotgun approach, because at this point I was now, miserably depressed. I was physically starting to struggle in the operating room, just having all these what I thought were psychosomatic aches and pains. Turns out I have ankylosing spondylitis, but different story. But I was really struggling and shotgunned it. I got no callbacks from utilization management. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know. Data research in San Francisco is a big deal, and I thought research, fantastic. I got absolutely no callbacks on that. There was an anatomy position open at the local university, and I thought that could be fantastic for me. Love anatomy. Applied. I was at the time now coaching at Sac State, and I thought that the head coach wrote me a letter, and this was a shoo-in for me. They just simply sent me an email back saying they wanted a PhD, which I didn't have. So that was very sad. I was then made aware of all these government positions, which I didn't even know existed, right? But if you think about it, Medicare and Medicaid need physicians to help them make a lot of medical decisions. And this was all new to me. I opened up the CalHR website and saw dozens of postings for physicians. I had no idea what the jobs entailed. They were all for different divisions and different departments. And I, again, just shotgunned it and applied for a whole bunch of them. And then I got a bunch of interviews and a bunch of job offers. So I just took the leap. I didn't know which one I should choose. I pretty much chose the one that had a physician supervisor because not all of them did. And I thought that had to be the best one possible. And so I kind of ended up in my job by default. It was not some grand scheme. It was not a plan. It was really by default. And as others have said, leaving clinical practice is actually extremely difficult. It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. And I was the power of attorney for my dad when he was terminally ill. That's how hard this decision was. And I wasn't leaving for something more exciting, right? And so it was very hard for me to acknowledge to other people that I was leaving for this state, civil servant job, essentially. I didn't know anyone at the time. This was 2016. I didn't know anyone who had left orthopedics. I was thoroughly ashamed and embarrassed to walk away. You let down as Abby said, you let down all of these people who took the time to mentor you, all of your colleagues, who don't necessarily understand what you're doing with your life. Like they just look at you like, are you kidding me? Are you really going to lose your investment? I thought I let myself down. I was ticking off all my goals, and now I was standing on top of my pile of pebbles and throwing up the surrender flag rather than feeling like I'd achieved anything. And I also felt like I failed as a role model for other women in orthopedics. Back then, there really weren't very many women, especially in orthopedic trauma. And so it was very hard to sort of step away from AO courses and whatnot, and that whole environment. So I just walked away very quietly. I really didn't tell people that I was leaving orthopedics. I just tried to disappear and do my own thing. But about 2 to 3 years after doing this desk job, while things at work probably weren't ideal. In fact, I was actually in the middle of a lawsuit. I was actually suing the state for what I saw were ethical concerns at Medicaid. And so I wasn't exactly well liked in my job. But it was at that point that it occurred to me that I was happier than I'd ever been despite this. That I had now found all these other things outside of work that were making my life really fulfilling, and that work no longer ruled my life. That I started to tell people that I was no longer working clinically and that I left orthopedic surgery for this state job. And that's when other people started to call me, other orthopedic surgeons. Some of you might be on this call. I started getting phone calls from others about, talk to me about what you did and what you were thinking, because I don't know if I can sustain this. And that was actually very validating for me, quite honestly, that I wasn't the only one. And I think it helps others to hear these stories, because you're not the only one if you're thinking this. What happened was I had this huge shift in my thinking. Instead of thinking about my career as who I am, and everyone else has sort of mentioned this, that it's sort of your identity to be an orthopedic surgeon. Now my life is not my career. My life is everything outside of my job. My job pays the bills and then some. It still pays fine. I'm not making a surgeon's salary, but it still pays plenty for me to live life. And I have great benefits. My life outside of work is really what matters to me now. And the reason I still love my job is because it enables me to have my life outside of work. What I did was I started to grow all these side gigs outside of my 40-hour-a-week job. I used to work 120 hours a week. And so a 40-hour week to me feels semi-retired. I work remotely from home. I work 4 10-hour days. So I have a 3-day weekend every single weekend. When you work for the state, you get every holiday off. And in fact, I used to get yelled at by my boss when we were still in the office. We're currently remote. When I was still in the office, I would get yelled at because at 5 o'clock, he's like, "What are you still doing here?" And I'd be like, "I'm in the middle of something." He's like, "It'll still be there tomorrow." So it was a really huge paradigm shift for me to just like at the end of the workday, get up and leave. But this did allow me to then grow all these other side gigs. And so I'm a coach. I am an assistant coach at Sac State for women's crew 2 days a week. I help out the head coach. I got certified as a personal trainer and group fitness trainer, which was, it started out a little bit as a dare and joke, and it turned out to end up being something I truly enjoy. It's a complete alter ego and absolutely not the person that anybody expects me to be when I am doing my training. Nobody knows that I'm a physician or that I was an orthopedic surgeon. I am simply another trainer and doing the hoo-wah, we can do this kind of thing off a podium with a little headset. And believe it or not, I have found this to be extremely gratifying to find ways to make people who literally rolled off their couch for the first time to try out my class and to see them come back and to get fitter and to get healthier. To me, I'm still practicing medicine in that way. I'm also a referee for U.S. rowing. You can see there's sort of a rowing theme here. I was a Division I rower in college and never really got away from the sport. And a lot of this is just me being able to give back to a sport that gave me a lot. And so, you know, the main thing with these side gigs is it gave me a community. In the past, I did not have, I had my community was in medicine, and now I had lost that. But now I've found community in all these worlds that are outside of medicine. On top of my side gigs, I started something when I was 40, which is when I moved to California and started the job at Sutter. Was I decided every year for 10 years, I was going to learn a brand new skill, something completely out there and something that I'd never done before and maybe never imagined myself doing. And this was largely because now I suddenly had time and I wanted to know what I had missed out on in life, because that's what I was feeling, that I'd missed out on all sorts of opportunities that life had to offer because I was so focused on my career. And so I, you know, and some of these stuck, you know, so I actually at the age of 46 learned how to ride a unicycle. Almost became an orthopedic complication myself. I learned how to fly fish. And Karen, I saw that you were holding a fly rod there in Alaska. We're gonna have to talk about that. It's become my passion. And I've met some amazing people through fly fishing. And so, you know, I highly recommend that people just explore completely random things and try and master them for a year. And they don't have to stick, but you never know what you might find out that you love that makes your life more fulfilling. I would say, as others have said, you have to find your own path. I would never, ever, ever, ever try to convince someone to leave medicine or not to go into medicine. I still think it was a wonderful career for me. It just didn't turn out the way I wanted it to or expected it to. I would, however, try to convince someone that they deserve to be happy and that you have to stop thinking about the path that you are on. And sometimes you need to make a major deviation from the plan to find that happiness. And it's okay to do that. You have to think about what you're willing to lose to win. This was mentioned before. Where are you in your career? That matters. You know, I was 10 plus years into my career when I decided to make the shift. Where are you financially? When I started telling people that I had left orthopedics, there were some who were very supportive and were actually jealous, but said, yeah, I wish I could do that, but I got 2 kids in private school and I just can't. And so, you know, I think it does make a difference to think about those factors and what you can do and how you can shift out of a clinical practice. And then, you know, the identity issue, it is real. Who am I if I'm not an orthopedic surgeon? It's almost, you know, awkward when somebody asks you what you do and you're like, I'm an never mind, I'm not, because I'm not. I don't practice. I haven't practiced in 7 years. And so I still don't really have a clue what I call myself, but I kind of just say I work for the state and leave it at that. And I'm really happy with that. And, you know, how much does it really matter to you what others think? I think that is a big deal, as was mentioned before. You try and brush that off as if it doesn't matter, but when your colleagues stop talking to you because they think you've done something absolutely ridiculous, that hurts. When you're trying to explain to your family, you know, I have an Asian mother and a Jewish father. I was the first doctor in the family, right? It was kind of a big deal. And to say, you know what, I'm going to quit practice was really hard. And you have to consider these things. That said, I do think your happiness matters more than anything, and it matters more than what other people think. If nothing else, being a trauma surgeon taught me how life can change in an instant. And I should have realized it earlier, but that includes your life. And with that, thank you. Feel free to email me. This is me pretty much every weekend here in California, except that it's been raining for like the last 3 months. I'm usually out there fly fishing. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess as far as we'll spend maybe just another 10 minutes on some questions and stuff. First of all, any of the panelists have anything else that they want to add or ask questions of each other? Okay. I think most of you, a couple of the questions were about sort of the burnout that a lot of you had mentioned. And I think most of you had went into a little bit more detail of like at what point of your career that kind of happened and the reasons for it. I think early on, one of the questions was for Abby, if you could just mention kind of like at what point of your training did you start to think about making a switch? Because it seems like you were still in training when a lot of that kind of thought process and planning was happening.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say that I don't think I was ever really happy or passionate about it, but you know, everyone says that, hey, it gets better, it gets better. Intern year is hard for everyone. Second year is the hardest year of residency. Don't worry, you're gonna get past it and it's gonna be better. And just my background, I'm Nigerian. I, you know, was born Nigerian. My parents are very much Nigerian. I grew up thinking you don't have to love what you do. You just, you know, do it and you provide for your family. And so I thought, like, even in med school, when I didn't really love it, I was like, well, it's fine. It's a means to an end. And then throughout the experience in residency, as I realized, well, it's not actually getting better. Like, sure, my life, maybe I'm not an intern anymore. I'm not taking in-house call anymore, but I don't like this life. And then I had my first kid, and it was really taking me away from being present for my first kid, which is something that I thought like that was important to me, that mattered to me. And it was just kind of weighing like, how can you be putting so much of yourself into something that you're not even passionate about, at the risk of the things, or I guess to the detriment of the things you do care about, you do want to like be present for. So I guess I can, to answer the question, it was kind of an ongoing thing. And then when did I finally like say, I really need to look at something else? When, you know, I had, you know, one kid and my marriage was like suffering because I was unhappy at work. That was the point. And let's say I seriously began considering other things my 5th year in residency.
Thanks for adding some details on that. Anybody else want to mention anything else about just the evolution of burnout or just kind of disenchantment with their jobs, and how to, you know, I think there are a lot of, you know, med students and residents on this call, and how do they start to process that and navigate that?
I wouldn't say that I was so much burnt out, but I just realized the math didn't work for solo private practice. I love what I do, but it's because I've always established kind of boundaries and limits with my practice. And just by virtue of the type of practice I'm in, the volume was never super heavy. But what was happening is I was moonlighting on the weekends. And so I was working 7 days a week, which was entirely too much. And I found that I could then, with the legal work, make as much in one report as I could in a weekend of, you know, 12-hour shifts and never taking a day off. And so I found that it gave me the ability to really tailor my practice to what I wanted to do rather than taking insurances that would have put even more strain on me. And just being busy for the sake of being busy without bringing any more home and having to hire additional staff for pre-authorizations, et cetera. What I've been able to do since then is go completely out of network for insurance and set really fair rates for cash prices. Now, that's not possible everywhere, but in Los Angeles, it is possible. And so I still have a lower volume private practice, but every single patient who is there to see me. It's not because their insurance told them to, and they're not upset that they're there, and they're welcome to walk out. But I know that everyone's there because they want to see me, and that really improved the quality of my day. If when I'm in clinic and when I'm in surgery, they're really seeking me out, and I'm really able to have a good relationship with my patients, spend an hour with them, take the time. They all have my cell phone number. I really enjoy my practice.
We had one person ask a question about compensation, and for those of you who have had the various, you know, stages in your career, how where you're at now kind of compares to other things you've done. And I know some of you already mentioned that in your talks, but any other comments on that?
So I came out of military practice, so mine is roughly the same. So obviously military orthopedic surgeons don't make nearly the amount that you can make in civilian practice, but mine is roughly the same income with significantly more flexibility and fewer hours and a lot less stress.
I'll just
So-
say for mine, it would be impossible to make the money that I'm making in clinical practice. It's just, there aren't enough hours in the day. So legal work is definitely by far the most efficient thing you can do.
So I was an academic traumatologist, and so you can imagine that's not the best pay in orthopedic surgery, for, especially when it's per hour. I now make half, and probably, I think to today's salaries, because government salaries don't go up very much each year. But in terms of what trauma salaries are that now, it may even be a third. But if I were to break it down hourly, because I work only 40 hours a week, I actually don't think it's all that drastically different. And I get, really very good benefits. Now that I have healthcare needs, like having good healthcare benefits is pretty huge. And to say this towards salaries, salary is important. I'm not going to deny that our financial stability is absolutely important. And so that's why you do need to make sure that you're in a place financially when you're looking at all these different job options. But for me, and I don't have children, so that was very, burden, there was a huge burden relief that I have that others don't. But for me, free time is exceedingly valuable to me now, to the point where I've been offered jobs now that I've established myself at the state. I've been offered jobs by third-party companies for significantly more salary that I've turned down. And the reason I turned it down is because of the position that I'm in, where I can tell my boss, the fish are biting, I want to take off tomorrow. How's that sound? And they'll say, great, have a great time. The flexibility for me to take time off at will is tremendous. I can save up to 4 months of vacation time and use it all at once. And they really can't say anything about that. And so, I took off for 3 weeks last year and went to Japan for 3 weeks. And it's very hard to find jobs that allow you to do that and have that kind of flexibility of time. I don't have a flex time job. I do have to work standard hours. But at the same time, I can say I need a couple days off tomorrow. I have a doctor's appointment and, later this afternoon, and it's not an issue for me to just take off. And that has been so phenomenally valuable to me that I'm not willing to take the higher salary to have that kind of flexibility.
And I would just say that it's a pay cut for orthopedic surgery, because while I never worked in an attending job, I did interview and had offers. It's a pay cut initially, but you can match your orthopedic surgery salary within a few years, once you're fully vested, with your stock options and things. And the ceiling, I would say, is much higher.
And I think my last question is going to be, did any of you need any extra training to do the things that you're doing now? Or if not, for people who are still pretty young in their career or in training, anything that you think would be a valuable sort of skill or connections that they can make early on in case they're thinking about doing something like this later on?
I would say not really. I would echo what Alexis spoke in her talk, is that there is so much we know as orthopedic surgeons. We have such a specialized fund of knowledge that sometimes you forget that you've got, 5-6 years of formal training plus all of your medical school. There's just so much that you already know that's valuable in other fields. We've talked about a number of them tonight, but it's a lot. And each individual job, I've had mentorship and help of how to write their particular reports or a little bit about that industry, the AOS course I mentioned. But really, we've learned so much over the years that really is valuable. I think medicine is one of the few occupations where it's considered odd to go from clinical to something else. Every other degree you get, this is expected. You work in one area, you transition to a different one. It's no big deal. Nobody thinks twice about it. I hope that medicine does continue to transition that way, because we have so much valuable knowledge to share.
Great. Any last comments from the panelists?
I'll chime in one thing. I echo what Dr. Flood said. I think in just conversations with a bunch of people, it's not so much about getting new certifications. Some things, obviously, you need like the PhD for that anatomy job, but it's about highlighting your transferable skills. Yeah, and making that clear on your CV or your resume, and making it clear to reflect whatever job you're applying for. That is what I've heard like time and time again in like many conversations.
I think that our medical training is very dehumanizing and does not lead to confidence. And so it takes some time to get over this. But like Dr. Flood was saying, we are trained in this. We are capable. We are the most specialized person in the room when we walk in regarding anything orthopedic. And it does take some time to realize that and kind of come out of the hospital setting. I mean, I was at a pretty toxic hospital for residency. And it felt like, you know, the nurses treated us like trash and the OR staff treated us like trash. And, you know, varying levels of our own co-trainees and faculty, it was just generally very dehumanizing. And so you didn't come out with a lot of confidence, but you have to build that up, I think, to be able to take the kinds of risks that you need to do to step out. And if you can find ways to foster that confidence, you're going to go really far. If you continue to stay in a resident mindset beyond your training, it will not serve you well. You're going to continue to do what other people tell you, and you won't really actualize your full potential.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your time and for sharing your stories and your advice. And we'll see everybody for part 2 in April. Have a good night. Thanks.